Yes, sir.
What's going on, guys? My name is Bart Komar, and this is our laundry room slash mudroom. And as you can see, it's totally outdated. And because we're doing renovations on the entire house, we're gonna change this to this. And I know it's not finished yet, but our brick flooring is. So this is a real Chicago common brick. None of that fake stuff. And it does take a few extra steps to install, but we'll run through everything from the underlayment to when and how to seal it, because that's really important. Plus, I want to do a cost comparison of installing this versus regular tile, because we have a ton of tile going in right now, and I just want to justify its cost. So let's get started. Welcome to the Komar Project. All right, after all the demo was completed throughout the entire house, I started removing all the old hardwood flooring that ran right into our mudroom. There's nothing wrong with this flooring and it's in great shape, but we wanted to get a completely fresh start with this house, so the flooring had to go. After all that was removed, we did a little bit of framing and our mudroom looks something like this now. It's pretty bare and a little bit smaller than before, but we wanted to simplify it just by making a passage from the garage to the living room because we're going to be moving our laundry room upstairs. But that doesn't mean that we can't make it look cool with this brick. Now, during the demo and reconstruction process, we put a severe beating on these subfloors, and there were a few areas that started to squeak on us. So we went through the entire area and marked everything with spray paint, and then we can come back with 2.5-inch screws to secure it back down to our floor joists to prevent any squeaking down a road. All right, so now that our subfloor is all fixed, we can start installing the underlayment. All right, so I want to have my brick completely flush with a hardwood flooring that's running into the house without a threshold. That's right, we're not gonna have your standard threshold that, kind of runs over everything. So what we're gonna be using is 1/4-inch hardy, and that's gonna give us just enough room to install that brick. Marking it is super simple. Since they have these little 1-inch squares on them, you can kind of run your pencil along it and it's gonna stay in a straight line, and you can even score without a straight edge. And that's probably why I gravitate towards hardy all the time. And I've used it probably, I don't know, for maybe 20 years, ever since I first saw it. It's never failed me, and I think installing it is much easier than some of the other cement boards out there. So when it came time to pick all of my underlayments throughout the entire house for, the bathroom floors and this mudroom and even our laundry room, I knew exactly what I was going to use. I'm using heavy-duty construction adhesive from DAP to glue down these boards, and then I can screw them down with 1.25-inch cement board screws. The other thing that I really like about these boards is that they take all the guesswork out of how far apart do you have to put the screws. Is it 6 or 8 inches from the previous screw? Nope, they have these little handy-dandy little circles all over these boards, and you don't even have to think about it. You just screw wherever that circle is. And if you have a lot of boards to put down, it really does make a difference. And sometimes it's just nice not to have to think about every little tiny detail. But in case you're wondering, it's every 8 inches.
Ready to do the tile?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That ain't it. All right, so check this out. This is essentially a print of a brick on top of a tile, and we were told that the Chicago emblem, like in a Chicago common brick, is supposed to be stamped. We need to get real brick. This isn't stamped, and I mean, they're okay, but there's no texture to them. We want that brick look, so that's what we're gonna go with. Well, that's a bummer, but I guess that's what I get for not doing my research on a product. We saw these online and thought that we could make them work, but they just looked way too fake. So while we wait for the real stuff to come in, we can finish up our subfloor by mudding all of our seams on the underlayment. When installing these boards, the manufacturer recommends that you leave a 1/8 inch seam in between them for expansion. But we don't want any voids as they can lead to tile cracking, right? So we're gonna go ahead and fill all those in with mortar and place Permabond fiberglass mesh over the top. Then I can smooth all of it out with my trowel and give it a quick wipe down with a damp sponge. Sometimes the trowel is going to leave ridges and little humps all over, just like with drywall, and brushing it down just makes everything nice and smooth so you don't have to worry about dealing with all that stuff when you're tiling and you have a nice flat surface. All right, now that we got our underlayment all situated, it's time to start installing the brick, and I'm super excited about this. Let me show you. So these are original Chicago common bricks, and the reason I'm so excited about this stuff is because one of my very first jobs ever was to actually salvage these bricks. So this brick originally started being produced in the mid 1800s, but in 1871 we had the Chicago fire, which pretty much destroyed the entire city. And because of its low cost, this brick was really popular to kind of veneer the outside of the building. So we've had a ton of this stuff, and back in the day, they used to just tear down the house and throw this stuff out. But now there are companies like Vintage Brick Salvage that actually take this brick and salvage it. So I have a personal connection to these bricks, and I wanted to incorporate them into the house. Let's get to installing, because this is gonna be fun. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Yay! To install the brick, I first need to put in the transition strip we briefly talked about before. And to do that, let me take you back a few weeks when we were installing our hardwood flooring. This transition is going to be very simple and clean, but I still don't want it to be visible when the door is closed. So the location of my first flooring piece had to be exact. And at first, my flooring installer wasn't exactly sure what I was trying to do, but once I brought out that transition and explained it, he picked up on it right away and was able to rip off the end of our flooring piece and install it in the perfect spot. All right, so for the transition, we are gonna go with a 1/2 inch Schluter transition. This thing is very simple. It goes up against the hardwood floors and the tile sits over this perforated section here. Now you can set this directly up against your floor and set the mortar, and it's gonna move a little bit over time because your floors are gonna move. So what I like to do is put a little bit of 5-minute epoxy on the back side here, and we're gonna notch it just to give it a little bit more grab. It's gonna keep everything a little bit tighter much longer. So let's take this over to shop and get it cut and installed. This stuff cuts beautifully at the miter saw, but you do want to place some tape over the top of it so you don't get any chipped edges. And as I mentioned before, I want to scuff the backside of it so that the epoxy can grab a little bit better. So I took it over to my sander and just ran it through a couple times. Gonna be beautiful. After my test fit, I placed a little bit of construction adhesive in the seam between the underlayment and the hardwood flooring. There's a small gap there, and I want to make sure that the corner of it was held by something. And yes, I could have used 5-minute epoxy there as well, but I figured I need a little bit more working time and I didn't want to rush this process. Now I can put the epoxy on the backside of that transition piece and place it up against the wood, making sure it's perfectly flush. Then I use painter's tape to hold it in place while the epoxy cured, and a few chisels to kind of shim it up into place, making sure that there are no gaps anywhere and everything is nice and tight. All right, so the first thing that I want to do is find the thinnest pieces that I can, because these are typically 1/2 inch, and so is our transition piece. Unfortunately, most of these are a 1/2 inch or a little bit over because they're very fragile, right? And cutting them to really thin is very tricky. So what I'm gonna do is find the thinnest pieces I can, something close to 3/8, like this piece here, and I'm gonna use these thinner ones right at the threshold so that it kind of blends in seamlessly. And then we can go a little bit higher after that. I'm not worried about it. because obviously nothing's going to be even here. But for that first 2 rows, I want to make sure I want to find enough of the smaller pieces. And unfortunately, I couldn't find enough pieces under a 1/2 inch, so I decided to shave them down a little bit. And the reason I'm doing this is because I need room for that mortar bed. If you think about it, we only have 3/4 inches of height to work with. And we've already used up 1/4 inch for the underlayment, and now the brick is 1/2 inch. So that leaves us with nothing for the mortar and to make any adjustments if we have to. Well, that was interesting. Never had that happen before. I think that was just God trying to say, stop, you idiot, and find a better way of doing it. So I bit the bullet and set up my tile set. And I was trying to avoid having to set it up like the plague. And not because I don't like cutting on it or setting it up, but because it was scorching hot outside. How hot, you might ask? So hot that I would rather contort myself into multiple positions to finish this than to open that door and be in the heat. Now I can start laying out all my reference lines that I'm going to use to separate the border from the herringbone pattern. Honey and I bounced the idea around of not having a border at all. She thought it might be a little distracting in such a narrow space, especially since we're going to have cabinets on the left side covering about 2 feet of that hallway, making it even narrower. But after looking at some pictures online, we really fell in love with that border idea and decided to stick with it. We ended up using a speed square to set the 45-degree angle on our first bricks and thought that referencing the 2 sidelines that are 7 inches apart from the center would be our best bet. But then we realized that we would have to cut bricks in half at the side of the border. So we shifted our pattern to the side and started working off that with a full brick. That way we would only have a little triangle piece every other course that we would have to cut. Once I had my first couple of rows figured out, we can start mixing the thin set and getting it ready to install. I slowly add water to the bucket and get it to the consistency of about peanut butter. I want to get it thin enough where I can easily spread it and don't have to fight it, but not so thin that it falls off our trowel. And speaking of trowels, there are so many of them out there that it's hard to keep track these days. I mean, you have the V-notch, the square, and you even have like ones that look like a half moon these days. And they all come in various sizes from an 1/8 inch to a 3/4. But I find it that the 1/4 inch by 3/8 lets me have the flexibility of a smaller notch and the depth of a larger one, which makes it a little bit easier to make adjustments. And then I also keep a few smaller spatulas around just in case I need them. Okay, so now we can start putting down the mortar. It's about time. And I'm using the short end of the trowel because it gives me a little bit more control and I want to embed that transition piece in the mortar fully. Then, once I have enough for the first 2 rows, I start placing the bricks in place and pressing them down gently. And you can see that I'm not using any spacers for this and I'm just eyeballing it. A typical brick mortar joint is about 3/8 of an inch wide, but it can vary from 1/4 to a 1/2 inch. And since these bricks are not exact, I just went with what looked good. Some are smaller and some are bigger. And that's the beauty of it here. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to look like it belongs. Once I'm happy with the border, I can start placing the herringbone pattern down. And you can see that I traced the first couple of rows of bricks down onto my subfloor. And now it's covered up by mortar. And that's not a mistake. That's just so I can take a look and make sure that I have my pattern correct as I'm moving down. It's really easy to get caught up in the installation and place the brick in the wrong orientation, especially when you're first just getting started and you're not actually used to that pattern. There are a few times during the installation, even towards the end, where I caught myself placing down the brick in a perpendicular orientation or on the wrong end of the brick. And having a pattern like that to reference really does help, especially in the beginning. So some of these bricks have this little nub. So if you look down it, you can see that it's bumpy up here. Same thing here, and I'm not sure where this is from or why it's there, but some of them definitely have it. What we're gonna do is grind it off. After doing some research, I found out that those imperfections we see in the brick are from its down and dirty manufacturing process back in the day. The bricks were made from a locally mined blue clay that was deposited by receding glaciers from the last ice age around the Chicago River and Lake Michigan, and was thrown into molds by hand before being put in the kiln for about 60 hours to be fired. And because the demand for the brick was so high at the time, they really didn't care what the brick looked like as long as it was structurally sound and fire resistant. But if you ask me, I think it looks better than some of the newer stuff out there, and that's why I'm really happy that we found Vintage Brick Salvage. They save these bricks and give them new purpose, whether it be for a mudroom floor or a backsplash. And if you're interested in doing this in your home, check out their website. They do have a couple of different other bricks to choose from, and they're offering a 5% discount if you type in the code KOMAR5 at checkout. Alright guys, so last night I had an epiphany. Since this brick cuts easily on the tile saw, I mean it cuts like butter. It's ridiculous. I think to get the border as straight as possible, or the little triangle pieces that go on the side in a straight line, what we're gonna do is we're gonna tile over our border and not put any mortar underneath it. That way I can just take a straight edge and cut it with a grinder with a diamond blade on it and have a perfect straight line. And I think that's gonna look the best. For now, we're just gonna tile the whole thing and cut out our border. I think that's gonna work the best. Yeah. After I got the main part of the hallway done, I got to the corner and now have to shift left where I don't have any reference lines. So I just pulled out my laser and used the already installed bricks as reference at a 45-degree angle to make new lines. This only worked for a few feet. Further into that hallway, I couldn't use the bricks as references because the corner of that wall was in the way. So I decided I'm going to draw parallel lines every 10.5 inches and use those as a reference further in that hallway. The 10.5 inches represent two bricks at a 45-degree angle with the offset in them already. And because I'm covering them with mortar again, I did end up using a laser over the top of them. I did originally plan to use a laser from the very beginning, but decided against it because I'm filming this entire process and I just didn't want it to be a distraction for you guys. But if I were to do this again, I would probably set a laser somewhere up high where it's not in the way and just constantly reference the same exact line. Once I was able to get out of that side hallway, it was fairly easy to tie everything in together and finish up the entire herringbone pattern. It did take me a little bit more time than I expected to install because of how small the bricks are and you're placing them individually and not on like a square foot sheet, but I was so happy with the way that it looked that I really didn't care how long it took. I just wanted to get it right. Good morning, folks. All right, so the brick is all in, and I worked pretty late last night, but I wanted to make sure that it was all finished, everything but the border, and I wanted that brick on the ends to have a chance to set, so for that mortar to set up, so that today we can cut out the border and chisel it out without damaging any of the other stuff. So once we have that border put in, we can move on to sealing this, but for now, let's get to cutting. I placed my laser 6 inches from the wall and traced out for the border along the tops of the bricks. And then using a diamond blade on my grinder, I cut right through that brick. And I'm really glad that I did it that way, not only because it came out much straighter, but it was so much quicker this way. This process probably saved me at least a couple of hours of measuring and cutting at the tile saw. Now for the corner, I didn't want to cut all the way through and risk cutting past my mark where it would show at the top of the brick. So I just cut as deep as I could possibly go without getting past that line, and then used the chisel to remove the rest. All right, now we got our border all cut out. It's cleaned up. The only thing that's wrong with it is it's got really sharp edges from where we cut it, right? So what I want to do is take a chisel, a beat up chisel, we don't want to use anything good, and just kind of scuff them up. You can even use a piece of sandpaper, even a sander, to kind of go over those edges, and that'll help blend that border around. Because right now, if we put those bricks right next to it, it's going to be sharp and then it's going to be round, and it's going to look a little bit odd. So we want to kind of bust them down a little bit. After cleaning up the edges, I started placing down our border, and I did start from the corner because that's the most visible part in our hallway. Now remember, I already have part of it installed at the doorway where the transition is, and if we were to start from over there, we would have a half piece here at this corner, and that just wouldn't look right. This is one of the things that you do have to plan out in advance and see where those corners meet up nicely. And you might actually have to make some adjustments down the road with your grout sizes. You might, make it a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. But other than that, this is probably the easiest part of the installation for me. All right, so our floor has been sitting for about 2 days curing, and now it's time to seal this sucker up. And we're gonna be using Miracle Seal's 511 Pores Plus. This product was recommended by the company that we bought this from, and it should be a fairly easy application with just a brush and a roller. So we're gonna go through and apply 2 coats of this, and it is a solvent base, so hopefully for cleanup, it's gonna be a lot better than a water-based product. Let's go. When I say better for cleanup, I'm not referring to wiping off the sealer access like you would with tile. I'm referring to removing the mortar off of the brick after we grout this floor, and that is why we're sealing it right now. As I mentioned before, this brick is super porous, and if we didn't seal it before grouting it, it would almost be impossible to remove the mortar off the brick. It would embed itself into that brick so hard that the only way to get it off would probably be acid washing it, and we definitely don't want to do that indoors. So sealing it is our best option. I used the combination of a brush and a roller to put the sealer down, and on the first go around, it just soaked it up instantly. I would turn around for about a minute and it would pretty much be dry. But by the second time I put it down, it would take a few minutes to dry, but I was still worried that that's not enough because it was still soaking it up fairly quickly. So I did decide to put on a 3rd coat. As far as the installation goes, it's pretty simple. You just want to roll it over the top of the bricks and try to stay away from the sides of that exposed brick. We want to be able to remove the mortar off of the top, but still have the porous brick side for it to grab onto. So I'm just going to try to stay away from those grout lines as best as I can. And some of it is going to flow in there because it's liquid, right? But it's not the end of the world. And once it has a chance to dry and it's not soaking it up as much, we can start grouting. I thought about which direction I want to go with when it comes to grout, whether I want to use the standard sanded grout like for tile or a more traditional method of mixing 1 part Portland cement and 3 parts sand, which would make up your typical mortar. And I don't like either one of those. The grout I think would look a little bit too fake, and the mortar mix I thought had too much room for error as far as I was concerned. So I went with a pre-mixed version of Quikrete mortar type and mix. All I have to do is just add water and get it to a consistency of like baby food or maybe like thick soup, because we're going to be using a grouting bag and it needs to flow freely. I got these bags from Amazon and I'm going to have a link in the description to them because they made this process super easy. We would fill about half of the bag with mortar each time, and to make it flow, we would twist the top end of it, kind of like you're hitting the throttle of a motorcycle, and it would just flow right out into our grout lines. We did have to modify the consistency a couple times by adding more water, and every time we did that, it just seemed like it was too runny for me because I'm just not used to it being so viscous. But even though it seemed wrong, it did flow much better between the joints that way, and it's still set up. Now, it did take a little bit of time for us to figure out how to hold it, how much pressure put on that twist to get it flowing just right, and we did take some time to experiment with it and talk through the process. But after a while, we were able to get the hang of it and actually enjoyed it. Sometimes you get things that look like they're a lot of fun, but then when you start doing it, it sucks. Well, this isn't one of them. We actually both enjoyed this process. We would do only about 4 to 6 square feet at a time because it does start drying up pretty quickly. By the time we would finish squeezing out a section, it would start hardening up on us and we would have to start striking it with a joiner. We first began using a S-type joiner, which is the type of joiner that your typical bricklayer is going to use on your house, but then quickly realized that it's giving us too much of a concave look. I was just worried that it's going to trap dirt too much. So we switched to a 3/8 inch flat joiner, and that made the grout lines look more even with the tops of the bricks, which is the look that we're going for. By the time we would finish each section, the mortar would set up even further to the point where we can actually take a brush and remove any excess from the brick and smooth it out a little bit further. And that started looking really good, and we can move on to the tedious process of washing each individual brick. This is the process that, in my opinion, probably is the worst out of everything that we've done so far, because it's painful. You're on your knees constantly scrubbing these floors, and it's stressful as well because you're trying to remove all that mortar, but these bricks have mortar on them already. So you're constantly going back and forth in your mind. Did I remove enough? Is it smooth enough? It played a few mind tricks on me, that's for sure. But I figured out a process where I could take a regular tile sponge and then use the white side to scrub the mortar off it, just kind of loosening it up, and then flip it over to the yellow side and just wipe it off. And that is it for grouting. Next, we have to seal this sucker one more time. The final seal is probably the most important. This is how my floor is going to end up looking forever, right? Whatever stains I didn't clean up or loose mortar I didn't fix is going to show up. So I wanted to really make sure that I swept everything, vacuumed everything a couple times, and just cleaned around the entire room before I started rolling on the sealer. And this time I went over the brick and the grout lines because I do want to seal them up as well. And since I figured a one coat is not going to be enough to seal those grout lines, I decided to do one final pass with the roller. And at this point, I think this is the 5th time that I'm sealing this brick, and it did take quite a long time for it to dry, but once it did, man, did it look good. All right, guys, so that is it for the installation portion of this video. If you want to see part 2, the price comparison of doing this versus tile or just figuring out how much it cost us to install, make sure you guys check out that linked video in the description below. Linked video in the description below, man. But yeah, it's in the description below. And and if you want to install this brick in your home as well, or in your warehouse or anywhere you want to install. It doesn't have to be in your home. It could be in a buddy's home. There's a 5% discount coupon code. Jesus, it's hard to talk today. There is a 5% discount in the description below from Vintage Brick Salvage, along with links to all the other tools and materials I used in this video. Thank you so much for joining me on this experience. I will see you guys next time. That puppy in. Oh, super long selfie. Whoa. You guys okay?
Oh my goodness.